tarot cards are often the first step and basis for a seeker of metaphysical knowledge, like you, to discover your forever path. That could be astrology, numerology, healing arts, or any other spiritual interest you discover along the way. Elaine Ireland is not only a teacher of tarot, she is a mentor who supports you and will be there for you. Visit www.ElaineIrelandTarotMaster.com now and discover how Elaine's mentoring, tarot card and psychic readings, tarot card classes, and more help you to grow into the true being you are meant to be. Welcome to Conversations with the Ancients, where you're about to discover a whole different world than the one that, up until now, you've believed you're familiar with. World-Renowned Metaphysicist, practicing psychic and tarot teacher Elaine Ireland invites you on a journey where you'll hear voices from the past, interviews with some of the greatest metaphysicians you've never heard of, because in their time, they needed to move with stealth. You'll also meet today's spirit mediums, healers, and others who will show you a side of the paranormal you've never seen before. Be sure you visit our website at conversationswiththeancients.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, hear the words of metaphysicians who blazed the trail. You're not in jail, thanks to them.
Elaine Ireland, and this is...
Hi, everybody. My name is Trece Spalten. I'm an intuitive advisor, a medium, and an energy medicine practitioner. And I've known Elaine for a long time, and I am so excited to be here on this podcast with you, Elaine.
Oh, I'm so excited. I've watched your growth from a distance. So that has really been... We don't see each other often. We connect every now and then. So it's like somebody losing or gaining weight. If you don't see them every day, you really notice the difference.
Yeah, you know? That's right.
So, right. And I've heard you take a different journey than I thought you were going to take. Trece and I were introduced by a mutual friend who is now making her home in Mexico, which...
San Miguel.
Yeah, San Miguel. That's only half of the name, I think. San Miguel, da-da-da-da-da-da.
Allende.
Yes, so pretty. Yep. But I think she was one of your first mentors. Am I correct?
Yeah, you know, we had a very friendly relationship. She was a good friend of mine. She was a bit of I would call her mentor, but more like kind of big sister.
Well, they could be good mentors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just saying that, like, you know, I didn't meet her as like a mentor, apprentice sort of a thing necessarily. We actually met because we were both a part of an organization called the Sibylline Order that's here in Texas. It's not as functional as it used to be, but it was a collection of people from various esoteric and metaphysical backgrounds that were sharing their knowledge and skills with each other. And so I met her through there and felt instantly connected with her. And she taught me a lot and she guided me a lot. But our relationship was always the only reason I wouldn't call her a mentor is because I feel like she would also reach out to me for guidance, right? And so it was definitely kind of a big sister, little brother sort of feel sometimes.
I like that. Okay, go over what you do again.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm an intuitive advisor, and what I mean by that is I do readings for people about their life. I help them find insights about their life, guidance in their life choices. I like to say that I help people, and this applies to all of my work, but as an intuitive advisor, I like to say that I help people restore their sense of self and reclaim their own inner compass. Right. I say that a large part of my job as an intuitive is to give voice to your own intuition so that you can hear it more clearly. And so I'm an intuitive advisor. I work with people in their lives. I'm also certified in somatic trauma therapy, and I include a lot of somatic work in what I do, both in my intuitive guidance as well as I'm an intuitive teacher. So I also help people develop their own intuitive skills.
The word intuitive, does that equal their psychic ability?
To me, it does. I find them to be very interchangeable with that word. I also love the word psychic and I love psychic ability. But what I find with that sometimes, and where a lot of my work has been focused, is that I find that the word psychic and psychic ability can sometimes take people almost immediately to a place that's ungrounded, right? That's larger than life. That is, sometimes to me, it feels like that there's a lot of projections in the word psychic, right? And for me, like I like to use the word intuitive with a lot of people, particularly if they don't have a lot of experience with psychics or psychic ability, because it sounds more, they understand that word a little bit better. They've already gotten their intuitive hits before about what's going on. So they kind of understand that, like they have senses of things. And to me, it also sometimes feels more embodied, right? Intuition is about what's arising from within you. It's about, and I also like it because of the etymology of the word. It literally means inner teacher. And so sometimes I'll even distinguish between psychic and intuition to mean that psychic can even be the ability to, extrasensory perception. It's the ability to perceive without the local limitations of time and space. I would say intuition is the same, but to me, intuition is not just being able to perceive. It also comes with guidance. It comes with direction.
Got it. I almost expected you to say that psychic was a word that would scare people away.
And sometimes it is, right? It's a word that comes with, it has a lot of projections. It comes with some of its baggage. I love the word psychic. I mean, I used to say I was a psychic when I was a little kid. I had no shame, no fear of that whatsoever. Like I loved the word psychic. I continue to love the word psychic. And I find that people have expectations about that. Tell me my future. Tell me exactly what's going to happen, right? When am I going to get married? All of these kind of questions that like there's this idea that as a psychic, you just have full access to everything. And there's just like one timeline that person's going to be living down, or at least that's the way a lot of people kind of experience things.
I agree totally. And I'm glad you used the word baggage with psychic because it does. It comes with thousands of years of baggage. I'm sorry, I'm sliding out of my chair.
That's okay. That's okay.
Pretty soon I was just going to be gone under the desk. Excuse me. I've thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years that have anything to do with the paranormal. And even that word paranormal, which I've watched you I've just listened to you avoiding that. And I get it. I think what you're doing with the word intuitive is wonderful. I have to back up a little bit because, and I'm going to out you a little bit here. Trece has a teaching background. So I would expect him to have an awareness of how words affect people and influence people. So I want our audience to know that you are a trained, certified elementary school teacher. Correct?
Well, that's not entirely true. I did not work in elementary school. I am a Montessori trained, although I don't have a certification in it. I spent a lot of time working in a Montessori classroom, so I've been trained by my teacher, but I don't have a certification, or my lead teacher rather. And I worked in early childhood education, so I worked with like toddlers and people getting ready to go into kindergarten. I worked with the littles, and I found that to be really one of the most meaningful things. I actually returned to the classroom. I worked in the classroom, the early childhood classroom, for about 8 years. And then for about 10 years, I've been doing my intuitive and healing work full time. And I found an opportunity and destiny aligning for me to return to the classroom part time last year with my original lead teacher. And I looked back at it in my life and seeing how long that I had actually done it, and realized that a large part of my life purpose that I never would have guessed back in my 20s was working with children, was being a teacher, was being a part of people's lives. It's really like the two ends of the circle with death and birth and children and elders, right? And so I considered it the privilege of a lifetime, really, to work with these little beings, because they come in and they show us who we are before we get so socialized and enculturated and so enmeshed in our story.
I'm so glad you said that. Before we get enculturized.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so important. I taught also, and I looked at I didn't teach littles. I taught 1 through 6. and went into the process as a teacher's aide to see if I could really do it after I sold my companies. And I told the principal, I said, I realize you may think I'm a little older to do this, but if it works, I'm going to become certified. Ended up teaching as a teacher's aide. And before I knew it, I had a classroom of my own. And he was sending people to me first through sixth, but I taught reading and math, kind of like a tutor, but that's the way the program was set up at the time. From various classrooms, teachers would send kids that need a little extra help, rather than, of course, I started out with the teachers in their classrooms. That's why I wanted to out you, because I wanted people to know that you're a natural teacher. It just suits you. It's in your DNA. It's in your blood. And I think there was never any doubt that you would teach. And now you're teaching adults, but psychically, I think you will end up teaching younger children intuitive development as you get grayer, as your beard gets a little more gray. I can see that's where you're going, because you've done it so many lifetimes.
I can really see that. I can really see that. And I've thought about that multiple times in the past. I've actually given a lot of thought to that, as you probably know, right? I've given a lot of thought to that. And, one of the interesting areas for me about that is that let me back it up. I'm going to tell a little bit of a longer story, I suppose. And so working with toddlers, working with 2 and 3-year-olds is a master class in intuition. The reason for that is maybe obvious, but when you're that age, you might have language developing, but you don't have a master of language. You can't describe what's actually going on with you to an adult. You don't have a mastery of language. You can't fully communicate. And some of them don't even have a full vocabulary quite yet. Right. And so a lot of being able to meet the needs of young children is being able to attune to them, to sense them, to be able to, what I would even say, telepathically communicate with them. Because that's also how they're communicating. When we're children, intuition, psychic ability is not something we develop. It's something we're born with. And it's a survival skill. In the beginning, it's a survival skill. We have to be able to psychically, intuitively blend with our parents, our caretakers, in order to get our needs met. We need to know, we don't have the language to describe what's going on with them, but we have to be able to organize a perception of them in a way that connects with them. We are constantly blending with our caretakers. We're blending with our environment. We're picking up on thoughts in the air. We're influenced by the emotions of those around us. As adults, that is one of the things I learned very early on in the early childhood classroom, is that as an adult, you can be having an off day, you can be feeling all sorts of stirred up emotionally, and you can walk into your college, you can walk into your workplace, and, most people are just going to pay attention to you from the neck up. So if you're smiling, you're saying, hey, everything's okay, blah, 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 right? And everyone just goes about their day, and no one really pays attention to what's happening below the neck for people emotionally. But you show up to a toddler classroom, and you think that you're pulling off some sort of great camouflage by feeling put together in your head while everything's stirred up inside of you. Those kids will tell you every time, reflect your energy back to you. It doesn't matter what you think it is. It doesn't matter what you want it to be. They will tell you what it really is.
I was going to mention that a while ago. When I was teaching, my kids were mirrors.
Yeah.
They would ask me, what's wrong, Miss I? You're not happy, Miss I. No matter if I'm up there leading a song.
Doesn't matter.
And they may wait until recess and come up very quietly. Are you okay, Miss I?
Yep.
Are you okay?
So it's first of all a master class in intuition, right? And it's like really on the ground, and there's no talking your way around it, right? It's really about what your energy is. It's about how you're communicating with your energy, which is intuition, which is psychic ability. Really, at its most fundamental, is just communicating through energy. And
I think
so I thought about that too.
Back up a little bit. What you just said about fundamentals, say that again for the audience.
I would say that fundamentally what psychic ability and intuition is the ability to communicate with energy.
Thank you.
And that's all it is.
Spoken and unspoken.
Spoken and unspoken. Right, exactly. And that energy is non-local, meaning that it doesn't have to be just, where you're sitting in your own time and space. Energy can be kind of anywhere in time and space. So that's part of how we can look into the future. We can see things from the past. We can tune into what people are really feeling. And that's because energy speaks.
Did your kids help you, or did you already know how to read auras? Did you naturally see auras with your
Oh, yeah. That was one of the first things that really, when I got old enough to start knowing that there was something unique about what I was doing. And I, believe it or not, I used to actually at about 13, 14, put on my helmet, get on my bike, ride across town to a metaphysical store to go to their psychic fairs because I wanted to meet other people that were psychic. And I just knew I was. And so I literally was just like, bye, mom and dad, and rode my bike across town to a metaphysical store at 13, 14 to go to a psychic fair. And they had a aura booth there, an aura photography, Kirlian photography booth there. And I had just read in a psychic development book about how to see auras. And so I started practicing. I was like, well, what better way to practice than to see what I see and see what comes out on the film? And so I was just kind of standing there, a friend with me, and I'm just saying, oh, I can kind of see blue right here, and I see like this green around their head, and the film would come out and it would look like that. And that happened about 2 or 3 times before the person running the camera, running the booth, turned around and said, how are you doing this?
We don't need a camera or tools. Most psychics don't. Most practitioners don't. With the tool, whether it's tarot or well, I have to back up because astrology and numerology is a totally different tool.
Very different.
Very different. But so many astrologers and numerologists are also psychics. Over
yes.
They develop that. That's what enriches their reading for their client. But folks like you don't need a tool. You may enjoy using a tool. It's fun. I'm a tarot master, so
I love tarot. Tarot is a beautiful teaching tool. Even if you're not using it to get the information directly, it's such a beautiful teaching tool because you can give that information directly, be like, let's pull a card, pull out that card. It reflects just what you said. Here's the graphic representation. And then you can talk about why this card means what it means. Yeah.
Have you ever taught tarot?
I have taught tarot in small classes. I have. Yeah. I actually created a whole workbook and everything. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think you would make a great tarot teacher because you're so observant of the small detail. And that's one of the things that even tarot readers that I've met over the years have read them for years and years and years, but they've not done the history and the antiquity research.
Right.
They've concentrated on what imagery was on the card that they prefer to read. And if you're reading something like the Swiss deck, which is basically a white background with skeletons on it and maybe a red rose every now and then, and it will denote whether it's a wand or whatever, sword, whatever, but there's no color on it. There's nothing else on there to give you any history about what that client might need. Anyway, public, if you're not familiar with all that, I apologize, but this is supposed to be a teaching tool, this podcast as well. So like he said, Montessori school a while ago, if you're not familiar with what a Montessori school is, to be a Montessori teacher is an amazing experience. I have not had it, but my youngest went to Montessori school as long as he could go because the public school system couldn't offer him what he needed when he went to school. We enrolled him in a private school, a Lutheran school, which we had researched, and the principal came to us and said, we teach through the 3rd grade and he's already there. So we suggest a Montessori school because at that time, if he'd gone into a public school on a 3rd grade level and he was a 1st grader, he would have been bored, not have worked socially. So we put him in a Montessori school and they were God sent because everything is so open. And for someone who teaches in a Montessori school, that tells you a lot about their spiritual growth and their open-mindedness and open-heartedness. So how perfect for you to have been a Montessori teacher. So folks out there, research Montessori if you're not familiar with it, and make sure you enroll your children in a certified Montessori school. not someone who has bought the heading that they can put on their school.
And even then, I really always recommend people. I've worked at a couple different Montessori schools, and to me, and I've also been to schools that just say Montessori, even though they're not certified. And what I have found is that um, it almost doesn't matter as much as how you feel about the individual school, because each individual school is going to implement that philosophy in kind of its own way. And so it really just matters on the school. You need to meet the teachers, you need to meet the director, you need to know not just the Montessori philosophy, but kind of the overall philosophy of the school itself, because they will all be different. I've gone to non-certified Montessori schools that I thought were absolutely lovely, and I've gone to certified Montessori schools I wouldn't send my kids to, right? They were like really rigid. And, something that people don't really know about Montessori is it can be very rigid, especially from the educator's perspective. Because, for example, one of the things that we didn't do, that we deviated from traditional hardcore Montessori, is that in Montessori, you're technically not supposed to engage the children in imaginative play.
Now, see, we were just the opposite. The school that he went to, that was a big deal. And being open-minded. And the teachers would say, now, why do you think that? Why did you say that? But they told the parents up front, we want to develop free thinkers. We are not competing with your at-home religion, politics, whatever.
Right.
We're a non-judgmental statement school. We will ask kids why they think or why they said what they just said, because we want them to realize words are important.
And that's good Montessori. That's pretty common. But the imaginative play that I'm talking about is technically you're not supposed to really have like a dress-up box in the room, right? For them to play dress-up and stuff, because there's a big element of Montessori. Because we have to remember, this is deviating a little bit, and then I'm going to circle back to another point that I was going to make earlier. But Montessori was developed by a woman named Maria Montessori in World War I Italy, I believe. And she worked with a whole bunch of orphan children and kids that needed a lot of support. And so a huge focus of Montessori was practical life and real life applications. And so there wasn't a lot in the philosophy about dressing up. It was about how to sew buttons on your clothes, right? And so there's even that element still in Montessori that's a little bit like that, right? There's no dress up box. If there's any depictions of like animals, for example, they're not supposed to be cartoon. They need to be as realistic as possible. Right? Because there's a real focus on realism, in a sense, in Montessori, very strict Montessori. And as you said, right, not all Montessori schools are going to follow that exactly. And that is precisely why the school matters sometimes more than the certification of the label.
Now, circle back. I interrupted you. Circle back.
So part of where I was going with this with intuitive development with children and teaching children about intuition is that I really think that we do need that in our younger years. We need a lexicon for it. We need a language for it. We need a way to understand what it is in order for it to be real for us. And I think a lot of children, if not all of us, have a little bit of even micro trauma around having a lot of intuitive or psychic perceptions and having no way to talk about them, no place to find it in our culture, no place to find it in our families. And so there's a part of us that feels foreign or alien, and it gets filtered out of our awareness, just like anything that doesn't get attended to in our consciousness. It gets filtered out of our awareness, or we just don't have a way to relate to it. Intuition, psychic ability, that's always going to be there, right? I mean, like, it's going to be running in the background all the time. We couldn't survive without it. And half the time we don't even know that it's happening to us. We take the right instead of the left. We don't think twice about it, but we avoid the accident. Like we all know about those stories, right? Or we just decide to go to the bank today instead of tomorrow when we were supposed to, when we run into that old friend, or however that works, right? Like it's always running in the background, always. But if we don't have a way to talk about it, relate to it, and understand it, we're not going to be able to access it in the way that we could. And so I think it's really important for children to develop that language as they're developing that language. But at the same time, as somebody who was a very psychic, intuitive child, I think that one of the areas that we also need to really focus on is the fact that there is a natural dimming of our expanded awareness. that starts to happen in childhood and really solidifies around the age of 7. Why? Because it's our task as a child not to be blended with everything in our environment. It's the task of a child to develop who we are as a person, as an ego, and not in a negative sense. We need to know who we are versus everything else. And if you think if you think about it, that's the most important facet of psychic protection, is being able to know when it's yours and not yours, is being able to have boundaries.
Say that, yeah, yours and not yours. That's so important. Expand on that a little bit for the public who may not be familiar with that line.
So what that means is that, and a lot of people everybody experiences this whether they know it or not, but the ability, we absorb other people's thoughts. We absorb thought forms, larger societal thought forms. We get activated by all of that. Even just recently, however you feel about it, with President Biden stepping down from the nomination and Kamala Harris standing up, everybody felt that energy. However you think about it, whatever your opinion of that is, everybody got activated by that energy, maybe before you even knew it happened.
That was a feeling a lot of people had for the last 6 months.
Yes. And so we absorb things from our environment, from the people around us. We are permeable beings, especially in our consciousness. This is just where it's focused, but the lens goes as far out as the universe. And so in order to be a person, in order to be a functional human being, which I think psychic ability and intuition is meant to help us be functional human beings, not spaced out in the 5th dimension.
And sitting around meditating all day.
Unless you're a monk, then that's your job, right? But if you're living a householder life, if you're living a everyday life, then it's supposed to help us thrive. It's supposed to help us thrive in our physical lives, in our personal lives, as well as to help other people, of course. We're connected to everybody. But that's the goal of being a child, is to learn who you are, to develop who you are and who you want to be in the world. And that's also where we get a lot of our complexes and traumas that we'll go to therapy for as an adult, is because even if you take the whole subject of psychic ability out, we still can sometimes get hampered in that as children. Many of us have experienced that, where our parents just project on us so hard who they want us to be that we don't develop that sense of self quite in the right way. And so I sometimes have reservations about teaching. At this point, I would say I would never teach intuitive development to children. What I would teach is intuitive language, how to describe what's coming up, give them a framework for it, and encourage them to be in themselves as much as possible.
You just wrote the first chapter of your book.
Yeah.
You just spoke. Let me rephrase that. You just spoke the first chapter. Actually, you may have just spoken your introduction to your book of development. See why I wanted you to record this?
Yeah.
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 We never know. And sometimes when we're doing things like this, we channel and channel and channel, and we don't even know that we're channeling.
Oh, that happens all the time when I get on stuff like this. Yeah, just blah, 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 it's coming from somewhere. Yeah.
Yep. That's what you need to be recording, because quite often, here I am playing psychic mother to you here. Forgive me.
That's all right. You've earned it. Yeah.
You're far from up and coming. Don't misunderstand me. And when all this settles, the dust settles and the editing gets done, you're going to be in the established arm category. But you are up and coming in terms of your teaching and sharing what you really know with the world beyond a one-to-one client.
It's
right?
true. Yeah.
Or just casuals over coffee with your friends. So it's important for you to keep up with what you say now, because eventually those words need to be written and shared, or even in lectures. And anytime you do lectures, I suggest you have someone record it, or you have something on stage, even if it's to tape recorder, an old-fashioned tape recorder, or a camera set up someplace, because that's invaluable grouping of what you can share in the future with other people who need not only their own experiences with what explanation of their experiences, But when it's put in a written word or on a DVD or whatever the latest thing would be by then, yeah, who knows? It's valuable and it's part of your legacy, which I had in my notes to ask about later, if not in this conversation, another one down the road. Because the quality of the people that I'm having conversations with go way beyond 2 to 2.5 hours. And
Oh,
yes,
sure.
Adam will and his crew will be breaking these up to maybe 30, 45-minute elements. Maybe not. Most of the time people don't have that much time, say in their car or whatever. If I'm on a long trip, I don't mind listening to an hour, 3 hours worth of something. But for somebody who just has a few minutes between home and work or in between something else, they'll listen to 30, 45 minutes. But that's why I want these conversations to be longer so Adam and his group can find a place.
Mm-hmm.
This introduction of who you are is crucial to people gaining trust in your words and what you have to share with them in the future. Now, we haven't even touched on the purpose of this particular conversation yet. We will. And if we don't get to it, we'll reschedule. You and I've talked about that. We'll add to this. Certainly, if you write a book, if you started a lecture series, which I think you should do, by the way, you're a teacher, so you know how to lay out the order in which things are done. And you can easily do that. You're more than qualified to do that. So right now, you're an established influencer. That seems
I
to be a
know.
fancy word these days.
I know. We can go on and on about that too. Yes, yes, yes.
But it's important to know that there are folks like you out there that have a gift to help children as well as older folks, other generational folks. And sometimes people can come to us in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they say, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm adrift out here. I've had these dreams. I've had this going on all my life, and now I have time to do it and do something with it, but I don't even know what I have. So you go all the way from littles to elders who need a grounding, which is really important. We do need a grounding in our metaphysical research, in our metaphysical life. We need a different kind of grounding. So I want people to know that you are a trusted voice in the community of that if they need you. But people will come to you that are supposed to find you. I don't care if they're in Upper Slobovia. If you're supposed to be connected with them this lifetime, they will find a way to do it.
Yeah, I connect with clients all over the world. Yeah.
Yeah. They find us. They find who, and they find us in the weirdest ways.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want people to know that about you. But when did you decide to make this a profession? Or did it just kind of slap you upside the head and said, okay?
It's both kind of a simple answer and a complicated answer because I mean, honestly, when I was probably around that same age that I was riding my bikes to psychic fairs as an early teenager, I got my hands on a book called The Top 100 Psychics in America. And it basically just profiled a bunch of different psychics and talked about them and asked them about their lives and how they worked and their experiences being a psychic. And I used to carry that book around with me because I was like, I want to be in this book. I want to be in this book. I want to be in this book. And I always knew I wanted to be a professional psychic when I was really young. And I got that opportunity at various points in my life. This was my college job. I was a psychic on weekends at New Age stores when I was in college. And I worked mind, body, spirit expos then. And, so I did this part. I've really done readings almost my entire life since I've been a teenager. Part of that has been professional, especially when I got older in my 20s. And then it was about 2014 that I really made the move into making this, more of a full-time profession, meaning that I wasn't just going to fairs and everything. I developed a website. I started marketing. I started doing those sorts of things. Right. And, And so it's really been since about 2014, so I guess about 10 years now that I've been doing this, I would say mostly full time, except for my year as a teacher. And there's a little massage therapy blended in there too. I got certified as a massage therapist in there, but I only did that for a few years. Say that again?
Know that?
Yeah. I got licensed as a massage therapist, and I did that for a few years. And before long, people wanted to come for readings more than massage, so that just happened. And yeah, and so I've been doing this my whole life, but professionally, I've been doing it mostly full time for about 10 years.
Like a lot of times, and I need to check in with Trace on this as far as the description is concerned. We become professional when we start charging.
Correct.
That seems to be where the line is introduced. Now, there are those psychics that are practitioners of a variety of tools that don't need money
Sure.
for whatever
Yeah.
reason, and they can do it for free. That doesn't mean they don't make it, that they're just as good as everybody else. Please, public, don't
Yeah.
get confused. If they don't charge money, it's a blessing.
Yeah.
So let them do their job. And then there are those that don't need the money, but they charge, but the money goes to a charity of their choice.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. And so I think it's important for the public to recognize that. So really it's only been 10 years, but you that you've charged technically.
Well, before then, I charged at the Mind Body Spirit Expos and in college when I was working at the New Age stores and stuff like that, right? But yes, but it was more full time about 10 years ago when I started putting myself out there as a professional.
Let's talk about that
Okay.
because you're much younger than I am. So my experiences would have been very different from your experiences. And I want to say, I don't like the word coming out, but introducing yourself publicly.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of experiences did you have becoming a professional? Did you get pushback? What did you get? Well, the community probably welcomed you, I would think. But what was the public's reaction to you?
Well, it was so much more welcoming and accepting than what I thought it was. And I'll be honest, I was way more, we'll just say fearful. I had a lot more anxiety about coming out professionally in that bigger way with the website and letting everybody on social media know and everything else. 10 years ago, I had way more fear about that than I did when I was 20 years old reading at the psychic fairs and the Mind Body Spirit Expos. I didn't care who knew. I would tell, it's just like I just had so little fear about it. And I had more when I got older. And I think the reason for that was that there's a number of reasons. The whole landscape changed. It wasn't just about telling people or people who went to certain locations that would find out, because the internet and social media became such a intrinsic part of all of our lives that to be out as a professional meant that the whole world could find you with a click versus being able to be out in different environments.
And see, when I started, I'll bounce on myself here. I'll be 80 in a couple of days, and I've been reading for the public since I was 17.
Yeah.
So back in the 60s and 70s, there was this ripple. And more than once, the metaphysical community has had to go underground.
Yeah.
I didn't even have business cards until I was in my 40s. People had to know people who knew people who knew people who knew people to get a phone number.
Yeah.
And we could go to jail. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast. I want people to know that whose shoulders we stand on.
Yes.
That's why there are categories on this podcast. And I mentioned that a while ago for you. You will be in the established. Eventually, you'll be moved over to the ancients. That's just a fact. And then there's a newbie. That's why I'm talking about what was it like for you. You've just described that. For me, my very first reading, I grew up in this world, in this field, in this family. It was normal for sentences to be completed. And anyway, but the mother of a friend of mine in high school, I was a weirdo. So I hung out with a theater group. I mean, just
yeah.
But my mother, her mother called my mother and asked permission. Ask, number one, is it real? Number two, may I get a reading from her? Mother said, you can't give her any money. Okay, well, that's fine. That's fine. She brought a lovely cake or pie or something for mom. I can't remember, for the household. But I was still hiding. And because of the climate at that time in America, mother said, we're not living in the country anymore. We're not in Europe anymore where it's open. We were military. And thank God I lived overseas. But here in the States, it was scary.
Yeah.
It was a scary time. They looked at people who read the Tarot, the Hare Krishnas, as being intrusive. And yeah, the Tarot.
They panicked.
Yeah, they panicked. People panicked. So my generation had this up and down, up and down, up and down. And when psychic fairs were started, we just held our breath.
Yeah.
Number one, the police wouldn't come arrest us. We wouldn't be picketed, which we were in Corpus Christi and Dallas, by religious groups. I have to say that.
Of course. Yeah.
So there have been times in my life when it all stopped and then came out again. And yet your youthful generation still had a certain amount of fear with it.
Yes, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, it was still connected. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the satanic panic was strongest in the 80s but still also the early 90s, and it continued. And quite frankly, it never went away. It just changed its targets, and it just changed its messaging.
Okay, I'm going to stop you. You slipped a word in there that some people are going to go, satanic.
Yeah. Well,
so
let's
start this. Why I wanted to talk to you and what you're doing now. You are not satanic,
nope.
But you work with a witchcraft element.
I have a strong background in modern witchcraft and Wicca and modern paganism and earth spirituality. And I like to be really clear about that too, that is my background, but I don't, maybe some other experiences people have had, that's not something that I'm going to push as a belief system. It's just the orientation where I come from.
And that?
Say that again?
Orientation where you come from. Where is that?
That's my background. That's my orientation, which means, what's the word I want to use for this? It means being grounded or being in depth with mythology, being in depth with the history of magic and psychic abilities, even as it goes through the Middle Ages and beyond then, to indigenous wisdom that our ancestors also had and was lost in the larger European continent and other places where that was suppressed and colonized. This also relates to spirituality that connects to the body and to the earth and to our daily life, and that sees desire and pleasure as normal, healthy, and important parts of living a fulfilled life, as opposed to denying them. It orients from the reality of magic, however we might want to talk about that we have the ability to shift reality through different means, through energy, if we want to use that language, right? It also means that I come from a place that is open to various expressions of the divine. Part of what Wicca, witchcraft, paganism, earth spirituality really connects with, as well as some form of polytheism, which means many gods. And so there's a welcoming of many different gods and paths to the divine and personal spiritual experiences. And so I say that I come from there as an orientation, but I don't do work with people saying, like, at this point, at least, like, I'm a witch. Like, when I'm doing a reading for somebody, when I'm doing an ancestral healing with somebody, when I'm reading an astrology chart for somebody, I'm not coming at it necessarily as a witch through that lens, right? As much as that has informed me, that's my background. And I'm so passionate about bringing those insights that I think are universal to people in practical ways that doesn't require them to believe something different. And a good way to describe that is that you don't have to be, you don't have to be a Hindu to do yoga. You don't have to be a Buddhist to do meditation, right? You don't have to be a witch to connect to the earth and do magic, right? That's something that there are things that are universal in my traditions, my personal spiritual background, that are unique to that background, but there's also elements in it that really can serve everybody, that are universal. And magic is one of them.
Okay, explain magic. I ask you to do that only because there's traditionally been such a negative attitude about the word magic. It's been
Yeah.
associated with the black arts, with the
Yeah.
helldonic energy. For many years, I would explain magicians as you've got Wiccan, which is typically white magic, earth, wind, fire kind of thing. And then you've got the helldonics. That's the one that traditionally Hollywood loves to say we're ripping out the heart of a baby kind of crap. And I would defend my Wiccan practitioners against assumptions. So you explain to the public as a practitioner the difference in the word magic for how you look at, and you mentioned a while ago many gods. Yes, absolutely. But the Jesus thing, and I somebody mentioned this the other day. They sent Jesus to get attention to God and away from idols, multiple
Mm.
idols. So, okay, okay. And this was from a person who has done extensive, I mean, lifetime research and theology. So, what is your explanation of magic, and why is it not okay to have many gods or goddesses and goddesses?
Well, let me start with that second part first. Like, I think that it
Okay.
is okay to have many gods and goddesses and many paths to the divine. And I think that what maybe your friend is saying without knowing a lot of that background or her research on that, their research on that, I'm not sure. But there was a consolidation, right? That was meant to happen. Like back in the day, we talk a lot about the separation of church and state in the United States and in our modern times, but really no such thing existed until the founding of the United States for as all of recorded history. And so religion and politics were the same. And so this consolidation of the divine and many faces of the divine into one was also a big political move.
I don't know that there is a division of politics and religion these days. I'm sorry.
That's a huge topic. We can go deep, deep, deep into that. But basically, that's kind of what I think it happened around there. And I think it had a large political angle to it that we don't always consider, right? Or that as spiritual people, maybe from spiritual orientation, we don't always consider that maybe there was a large political component in there. And that's not to say anything against Christianity or Jesus whatsoever. I love Jesus. You know, one of the things to connect Jesus in now to magic, which might also be controversial, is that I remember as a child feeling affirmed by the stories of Jesus in my Sunday school class with my abilities, because Jesus said, "Don't you know that ye are gods, and these things that I do, you can do also."
Right.
That to me was saying, Jesus is saying that you can do these things.
Isn't it interesting that Jesus can make wine out of water? Some people would say that's magic in today's world, using that word in today's world. So why do people take away or discourage rituals, which to me is prayer, candle burning? That's also a ritual.
Yeah.
You know, why are we not supposed to be able to do the same things, the walking around human being, as Jesus did when he said, you can?
He said you can, and that the whole kingdom of heaven is within you.
Right.
Right. And so why? That's a great question. There's a historical answer for that. You can blame the ancient Greeks. All right, way before Christianity ever showed up, right? And that is because the Greeks had a thing against Egypt, right? There was a lot of back and forth in Egypt, and they also took over Egypt for a while, right? There was a whole Greco-Egyptian period and all of these things that were going on. And they really just tried, again, political, they were really defining themselves against Egypt, particularly in their religious practices. And because Egypt's religion had so much magic to it, and the definition I'd use for Egyptian magic, at least here generally, is being able to access divine power for personal ends. And that doesn't mean personal gain, but like access divine power to help this soul go all the way to the other side. Access divine power to bring rain for the Nile to flood the crops, right? To access divine power. And it was the same divine power that the gods accessed in ancient Egyptian cosmology. It was the same power the gods accessed to create the universe. So it was considered this universal power that we all had access to shape the reality, including the gods, right? And the Greeks looked at that and said, no, that's not religion. That's magia. That's magia. That's this lower magical thing that you're doing. We're doing religion. We're doing real religion over here. You're doing magic. And so the word magia, magic, was literally used even from the time of ancient Greece to denote a lesser religion, or the religion that got dominated, or the things that those people over there doing counterfeit religion were doing. Okay? And so you will find the word magic has been so contextualized to be opposed from a miracle, because a miracle comes from the real God, the real religion, and magic comes from counterfeit religion. And you will find that as a thread throughout history from the time of ancient Greece. And it changes a little bit in there, but there's always kind of this conflict that sort of happens around there. However, in my mind, there is no difference. To me, the definition of magic is accessing spiritual or divine power for a personal end. And that doesn't mean selfish necessarily, but that means, technically to me, if you're lighting a candle and praying to anybody, to God, to Jesus, asking your spirit guides, Archangel Michael, for a specific change in your life, you're doing magic. You're doing magic. And maybe there's a lot more to magic than just those simple things, but essentially that's magic. And if you want a really good example of where these things were still in conflict but utterly blended, I would say look at the time of cunning folk in England. Because the cunning folk, as they are known in academia in England, this is during the witch hunts, this is during all of that stuff, these were the local healers, these were the wise ones, these were the diviners. Okay. And they were doing all of this stuff very often in the name of Jesus, in the name of God, calling on the saints to make this magic happen. And we're talking about finding lost objects. We're talking about securing a husband. We're talking about, making sure that you'd win in court, right? Like the things that magic is used for, like at a very practical level. And this was also being done in the name of what we would consider traditional religion. Now, of course, the church didn't like it very much either. They were like, no, you shouldn't be doing that. That's technically heretical, right? You shouldn't really be doing that. But they thrived even during the witch hunts. They thrived because they were such an essential part of their community, just as we are now.
I've mentioned this before. I can't remember when, but in one of the conversations, I had someone tell me years and years and years ago, a highly educated professional, psychics are some of the most underpaid therapists in the world. And I think part of that is because even though we don't have a license behind our name, some do. Absolutely. We've got doctors, lawyers, we have chiropractors, we have all kinds of folks, therapists, all kinds of folks that do this work. In fact, one of the women in our community gave up her therapy license so she could be a full-blown shaman and teach that. She gave up a 30-year license because the state board said, you can't do it.
Yeah, I know it. I struggled with that too. I was on a path to be a therapist, and I struggled with it immensely and ended up leaving because of that, because I didn't want to have to try to fight these two worlds, when really the whole point of me going in it was for both worlds, right? And I may even still go back to become a therapist now, because psychology, Western psychology, at least in some areas, has finally changed enough where I think that there might be a place for me. If nobody's heard of it, look up internal family systems. I think it is one of the most connective into this world and grounded in scientific evidence that you will ever find.
Say that again for folks.
The methodology is called Internal Family Systems, IFS. And you can find boatloads of information on it on the internet, on YouTube, and books and audiobooks, tons of it. And I Just cannot recommend it enough. When I first found out about it, I found out about it because I went to go get certified in somatic therapy. And the reason I went to go get certified in somatic therapy is because when I discovered what somatics was, I was like, oh my God, I'm doing somatic work with people and I didn't even know what I was doing. I thought that this was just sort of like my angle into all of this, you know. Then I was like, I didn't realize this was like a field that was being developed. And so I went and got certified in somatics, and in that certification, I got training. One of the classes was from the originator, Richard Schwartz, of internal family systems. And he started describing this system, and I was so excited, but at the same time, so, what's the word for it? Enraged isn't quite the right word, but it sort of matches what I was feeling, because he's basically sitting here saying that we have a bunch of parts to ourselves, and that underneath all of these parts is a true self, and that true self has the clarity that's able to heal these parts, and that if we can tune into this true self that they've been able to find through evidence, and all this is evidence-based, and he's like, and I've led people through tapping into their true selves, and it's helping alleviate addictions. He started out really alleviating eating disorders, right? And so he has all this evidence around it, and basically what it is it's spiritual work. It's tapping into your true self. There's even guides in IFS that are not your parts, right? And being able to talk to your different parts and knowing that your true self has the wisdom naturally to give these parts that are maybe in pain or trauma what they need. And so this is a very high level description of IFS, but essentially that's what they're saying. And I'm hearing this going, oh my God, yes. And at the same time, like scraping my nails across the desk that like this is finally being said in a psychology setting. Do you know what I'm saying? And,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. And I'll tell you that Duke University was a leading educator of psychic ability, but they didn't call it that. I wanted so badly to be verified.
Yeah.
When I was younger. I thought, well, I'll go back to school and become a therapist of some sort. So I started doing research, psychology, all kinds of therapy. That was available at the time through the University of Texas, because I lived at that time in Austin. And I talked to an instructor, made an appointment. She was the head of psychology department at the time, one of the first women to ever be the head of psychology department, which was a big deal. And they didn't have women's studies at the time at UT. So it was different. And I had told her over the phone who I had asked her secretary who I should talk to. And she said, well, this lady, you need to come talk to her first. And I did. And she was a woman in her 50s at the time. I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And she listened to what I wanted. I poured everything out. I'm a practicing psychic, da 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 da. She listened, and I'm thinking, she's judging me, she's judging me, she's judging me, but she wasn't. She was a very good listener. She said, my aunt was a Russian gypsy. I know exactly what you want. You will never be accepted into this department if they get wind of what you do prior to. I said, not even if I apply to take, just register to take a couple of courses. She said they will do everything they can to take everything you have away from you. And even if they hand you a degree, you will never be honored or accepted into any facility, into any club, into any organization. You will not be honored in any way. In any way. They will give you that degree, and then they will take your license away from you eventually.
Yep.
Save your money. Go be the best psychic you can be, but don't even try to verify it.
I ran into that in the early 2000s. I mean, like, honestly, it's still
2000s? Really?
I graduated college in 2006, and I graduated with a degree in psychology. And even then, like, it was still it is anathema to include those things back then in traditional psychology. And it's still happens today, even though there is so much more good evidence and so many more good researchers and so many more good institutions that are looking into this. There is still what I would call a dogmatic vehemence against psychic abilities in a lot of the scientific and psychological research world. If people want to look up somebody who I think really broke everything, but they're still scrambling to make up for it, is a guy named Daryl Bem. And you should look up Daryl Bem. Daryl, like you'd spell it, and Bem is B-E-M. And he's a psychological researcher that essentially did the most standard psychological test that you could imagine and basically showed substantial evidence of precognition. Substantial evidence of precognition. And it broke, and it got published in a mainstream journal that then later retracted it and apologized for ever publishing it. But they published it because it was peer reviewed. It followed every standard. It was a perfectly legitimate psychological experimentation. And they published it because it met all the qualifications, but it got such hard pushback from the dogmatic skeptics that they eventually took it out and apologized. But it also precipitated what was known as the replicability crisis in social sciences, meaning that it was so standardized with such solid evidence that the question became, okay, either everything we thought was wrong in psychic abilities are real, or our science has been wrong the entire time. It was either, and they were more likely to say that our science has been wrong the whole time and we need to figure that out than say psychic ability is real.
This is a little thing, but I'm going to mention it because I think it's important. Many, many years ago, there was a psychic here in Austin that when you called to make an appointment, you had to call before 6 o'clock in the morning. She did not answer the phone because she started reading at 8. She wanted her appointments made and she was usually 3 or 4 months out. I mean, so if you got an appointment with her, you better show up because it would be months before you could reschedule. Okay. With her, she didn't want your name. She didn't want your first name. And she just didn't. If you said, "Good morning, this is Elaine," she'd go, "I don't want to, no, you called me at 4:25 this morning. That's your code." Because she didn't, and this was so long ago. This was when I was like 19 years old. We only had a phone, no computer. If anybody was going to do any research, they had to do it in person.
Yeah.
Going through newspapers, whatever. She did not listen. She didn't even have a TV in her house. She had a radio and she had records. She did not want to know anything about you. She didn't know she didn't want to know what your questions were going to be. So she could not be accused of not being real. And this was a woman who was a retired nurse. And she never I don't know how many times that woman was arrested. She helped the police department, but then she'd get arrested for helping the police department, which is why most psychics, including me these days, I worked with them for a long time. But she went to a great length, and yet you'd sit down at her table and she'd go, boom, 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 boom. Everything was right. Everything was right. Even when she told me I would have children, when I was told I would never have children, I did. And I looked at her and said, "I can't have any children." She said, "They lie to you. Wait and see." Everybody that went to her community, we've had to be so right on and real, which just makes us better psychics, which ticks them off.
Yeah.
They come at us from another angle. And yet at the same time, they put it, if we are willing and with our permission, they treat us like a lab rat. I stopped being a lab rat in my late 30s. I said, no more. All you're doing is trying to unvalidate us instead of validate us, which I get. Scientists have got to do the proving and the disproving. I get that. What was the man's name that for years would give $1 million to somebody, which then was a lot of
The
money?
Amazing Randy.
Yes. Oh my God.
Randy something or other. I just remember Amazing Randy. It's Randy something or other, but it's the Amazing Randy.
Well, he finally stopped because he couldn't disprove it. So it's, I don't know why they just won't learn about us and try to help us bottle it up.
Well, another huge breakthrough moment for me in the world of psychology came with the publication of a textbook, essentially from the American Psychological Association, called Transcendent Mind. And the entire book it's published by the APA. It is a textbook of for psychology students. And the entire book is rethinking non-local consciousness and all of the evidence that has been built around all of this phenomenon that now exists. Like, these are like, this is all of our hard data. And the problem is that I found really interesting in this book is that it still has to walk this line to make a bunch of people happy, right? In order for it to get published and everything else. But really, one of the biggest problems is a lack of scientific knowledge of how this is possible. Because in the beginning of this book, they go through all these different models and theories of reality, of physics and everything else about how we might explain these things. But there's not in our current scientific paradigm, there's not a way it could happen. And so the way that it keeps getting researched is basically saying, we can't scientifically say that we know this is happening or why this is happening or exactly even what is happening, but we can have mountains of verifiable scientific evidence that say something sure is happening.
We're going to wrap this up for today, but don't forget books, audio, when you have time. There's no hurry because we've got time I cannot tell you thank you enough.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I can't wait to do it again.
Mwah! Thank you so much, people. Don't forget to share a smile, everybody. Bye, darling.
Bye, Elaine. Love
you.
Thank you for tuning into The Conversations with the Ancients, where we take you on a journey where you'll hear voices of metaphysicians from the past, as well as today's spirit mediums, healers, and others who show you a side of the paranormal you've never seen before. Remember to visit our website at conversationswiththeancients.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on Conversations with the Ancients.